Another issue is just a point of interest, I guess, more than anything, is the phenomena of our fascination with supernatural, paranormal, this whole genre or spectrum of knowledge or feeling, whichever you want to call it. And what do you think has contributed to that? Is it television and the Ghost Hunter series that are showing up? In fact, there's more than one of them, and that is making it more interesting to us, or has this interest always been around and we're just now hitting it hard because of the media that's around?
Because in earlier times, elderly people sat around in the house on Saturday nights and Sunday afternoons, and they would tell stories, not always about ghost stories, but they'd be a part of that. And it was amazing as a grandchild how I used to sit around and hear my grandparents and even my great-grandmother tell stories. And many of them were about the presence of ghosts in as far as their experiences were concerned. And changing the subject slightly, but the reason that I love ghost stories is simply because they do, as I think I said this before, they do provide so much historical information that is not available anywhere except through the oral process and the memory of the people who have these experiences. And I'd like to ask the question, how many of you, and don't be afraid to hold up your hand if it's happened, how many of you have had what you consider to be a ghostly appearance in your presence? I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so have we said anything that you'd like to add to, for maybe perhaps?
Yeah, we're going to have some questions from you all here in a minute, or you can relay your own experiences. But to continue on to the why is this so current right now? That's a phenomenon that, I mean, ghost stories have been around forever, as you say, in the oral history tradition. I can remember growing up and hearing them myself from various places, and that's what we remember from childhood, that's for sure. But it was not the phenomena it is now. It seems like, every time you turn around, there's yet more literature and certainly television and movies being made in this particular spectrum.
And I think it is television and movies that you just mentioned. That's why so many young people are interested, because they watch things that even adults do not watch.
Yeah, that's true. Do you have, Tom?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that, like, I love technology. I treasure it. I don't know if I could live without it anymore, but but I think that actually, as we grow in technology, I think the fascination with things that technology can't explain, like, I feel like that urge to watch a ghost hunting show is to be like, to disprove. I think the urge is constantly to disprove. And won't we ever come up with something, an app or whatever, to like prove that the ghost was in your room or prove that you saw it? And I think it's one of those things that that defies that sort of thing. And, and I feel like there are always going to be sort of rejections of whatever is happening. So there's a rejection of technology in a sense, because ghost stories are so sort of basic and primal. It's like that sort of fear or that sort of feeling is something that is so outside of technology, and it's so sort of just like natural to us as a species. And so I don't know, I feel like that could have something to do with it, or not. But for me, I know it's a thing. I'm like, well, there's no way to prove or disprove this. It just is what it is, and there's no computer, program or whatever that's ever going to really like come down on the question. I don't think there's ever going to be definitive proof. I mean, maybe, but I don't think there'll ever be something you could point to and say like that proves it.
I think you're right.
So so you kind of it goes back to very, very basic, human interaction, because it is so much about sharing and it is so much about memory. And that is so outside of technology, which I think makes us more kind of inside of ourselves, you know? It's it's more of a sharing genre, I think.
Tom, did you have a comment?
Oh, thanks. Sure. Here we are in the state of Kentucky, and there was a notable event 214 years ago called Cane Ridge. And Cane Ridge Revival happened in Bourbon County, you know, near Paris. And I think there's waves of interest in spiritualism, you know, to use an archaic term from the 19th century,
Right.
or paranormal, or, you know, whatever the vernacular of the time is. So I think that we have these interests that kind of ebb and, you know, fade away. And so at Cane Ridge, there were 30,000 people came to hear the preachers, which was a lot of people in 1800, you know, on the Kentucky, you know, frontier. So it seems like we always kind of cycle in and out in an interest in these things. But of course, you know, there are always people messing around, you know, but maybe we pay more attention to that now and have it more over, you know, the internet. But there are always people experiencing spirits or ghosts. So, you know, some things I think, you know, are universal. But I think what I've seen in society is a tendency to not sweep things under the rug. So, you know, Ben talked about the incredible abuse that people suffered in the asylums, and, you know, and that's been documented more and more with forensic, you know, efforts of finding, you know, all these children that died on site. I think there's that one place in Florida. But anyway, so abuse is nothing new either. But what are we doing now? Once again, it gets back to the socialization part. What do they do with children now in school? They teach them good touch, bad touch. We're, instead of sweeping the whole idea of sexual abuse under the rug, let's talk about it. Nothing will change until you talk about it. And that's true for sexual abuse, that's true for militarism, that's true for materialism, that's true for spiritual things, that's true for existential denial, where we don't want to talk about the fact that we die and, you know, these bodies rot in the ground. So what I think is changing, and the internet helps, and all the media, is that we're willing to give a dialogue. We're going to blog about this. I'm going to talk about having cancer, you know, that one person that gets on the internet. And that changes and affects us all. So the internet can make it, and technology can make it more very immediate. But I think we're on a trajectory in society where we're tired of sweeping things under the rug. We can't live our lives unless we bring these things out in the open. Stories from the old times, stories from encounters of ghost spirits and angels, and all those other things that we often, unfortunately, have ignored in society.
Ben, did you have anything to add to that? Your take on the phenomena?
All I know is I grew up without all those ghost hunter shows, and I was into it from the very beginning. Like, you know, I had the Night Stalker with Kojak and Scooby-Doo, and that was as far as paranormal went.
We had like Goosebumps. Those are rad.
But I think the popularity of the television shows, I think, is way over. I think most of the shows are way overrated. They inflate a lot, and they show all the good parts, and they don't show you sitting in a room, in a dark room for 6 hours, talking to the walls. That's essentially the life of a ghost hunter or a paranormal investigator. So I think it's, you know, at times I think it's rather sensationalized. But, you know, to have a really good paranormal experience, you don't need cameras, you don't need tools or equipment or anything like that. You just need your brain, you need your heart and your eyes and your ears. That's all you need. And I think that's something that television can't capture. So embrace the personal experience if you can, rather than watching it on a television show. Because it's, your life will be much more enriched if you actually experience it yourself, rather than watching someone else do it for you.
But
That's
definitely buy our books about it.
Mine's more of a travel log. Really.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You can take it with you on your tours.
Oh, okay.
Well, I have one final question for the panelists, and then we'll be glad to hear from you all and hear your questions from the audience. But tell me, what is the most haunted place you've ever been that you literally felt the spiritual or the phenomena, I guess is the
Well, I
word.
can say, answer that by saying that I was invited down to Thibodaux, Louisiana, to speak at Nicholls State University. And the people who owned the plantation house where I was invited to spend the night, they did not live there, but they owned it. And so they didn't tell me that there was a ghost up there in the house. And so they gave me a key to off the ground to get in the back door. And then he said, go up the steps, and then at the top of the steps, take a left and use this key to get in that door. And so I did. And of course I was alone, and they said, now we're leaving, and we'll be back to pick you up though in the morning to take you to breakfast. Well, when I opened that door into that room, I smelled an awful smell. And then suddenly, now this is a true story, and then suddenly I heard footsteps walking across the room. And then I heard a deep breathing, like that. And so different things. And I even yelled out once, "Who are you?" I got no response. But after 30 minutes of that taking place, of that whatever it was in that room, then it left. And there's nothing else in there except me. And I finally went to sleep that night about 3:00 a.m. and when I got up the next morning, they came to take me to breakfast. And so I asked them, I said, what in the world did I experience up there in that room last night? And the wife of the man, she said, oh, she came back again, did she? And I said, well, what do you mean she? And so she said, well, she and this woman and her husband owned the Melrose Plantation when back in the 1980s when they both died. I mean, I'm sorry, 1880s. And but they both said that over half the people who spend the night with us in the same room you were in, over half the people describe exactly the way you told what happened to you last night. And I said, well, why do you suppose it happened? And the lady said, because she loved this plantation and this mansion that you slept in last night. She loved it so much that even after she died in 1888, she simply refused to leave this house because she loved it so much. Now that is a true story.
Mm-hmm. I love that they put you up in that room. That is like the best. I mean, I love they're like, oh yeah, half the people who stay here have a really scary experience, but whoop, like, I just think that's kind of phenomenal. I don't know. I mean, my house, I don't feel as like really haunted. I would say like mildly haunted. I don't know what the scale is. But when I went to Europe, there were a few places that I went where you're like, you can just feel how old those places are and how many people have come and gone. And I didn't necessarily get negative feelings from some of them, but I just feel like there's a real sense of history and of just like the sheer volume of life that's happened there. I think sometimes you have to go to really old places to get that feeling. I don't know if that counts as haunted, but I haven't actually been in many places that I would say, like, definitively, this is the most haunted. I don't know which one I would pick, really.
What about you, Tom?
Well,
And now that's a deep subject.
yep.
Yeah.
I met some ladies in Louisville, and they went to high school together, and they would do trips together. And they ended up in Europe and England and Scotland. And one of them booked a stay in a haunted Scottish castle. And when you read their account, it's got so many layers, so many different ghosts, and it's just terrifying, what they describe happening. So this is Borthwick Castle, and you can read some online about it, and you can also read in Eerie Encounters. But she got a photograph of a little girl ghost running in front of the great hall in the fireplace, and she just has an amazing story. Now, once again, there's that selectivity again, because other people in her party, they didn't experience what she experienced. She went upstairs and smelled this terrible, terrible smell, and they didn't smell that at all, and she heard a pounding all night. She didn't really get any sleep that night, and they didn't hear the pounding. So, or some that did hear it, they said, aha, that's just a couple in the next room. But, you know, when the castle walls are 13 feet thick, it's pretty hard to get a pounding going.
That'd be impressive.
But the short answer for that question is I would point to, you know, our heads. And I'd say the scariest place that I can think of is in our own mind, you know, depending on what your experience is and how you react to it and how you deal with it and your journey about that. Because in many stories in haunted houses, it ends up being a telepathic communication, because the person thinks, you know, I wish that ghost would stop turning off the lights, and then they do that. You know, they act on your thought. They don't just, you know, act on what you say out loud, but the ghost and spirits will actually respond to your silent thoughts. So I would point to our own heads and say that's got to be the most haunted place. And a couple guys wrote a book called Haunted America, and at the very end, one of them said, I've come to the conclusion there's no haunted houses, only haunted people. So I call these people psychic attractors. And so I think, you know, that's got to be the most haunted place when you're that sensitive and you're always having experiences. No matter where you go on the planet, you're going to run in and you're going to find the ghosts.
Right.
Yeah.
So Ben, I know you said you had a very specific place.
Aside from Central State in Indianapolis and my old family home in Dayton, Indiana, and I'm not trying to patronize anybody here in Kentucky, but Waverly Hills is probably one of the most unnerving places to actually be anywhere, ever. I had the pleasure of going on tour through there, and it felt like I was at the zoo, only the animals were looking at me instead. It was like I was the exhibit. You know, you could just feel like thousands and thousands of eyes. It just, nothing there, but anywhere you went in that place, you didn't feel alone. And it was very unnerving. It was very unnerving. The only time I've ever felt uncomfortable in a quote-unquote haunted location. And that was enough for me to say, this is a pretty crazy place.
Well, I
And
spoke
gotta
there
come back
twice, and I didn't experience anything.
Well, that doesn't surprise me much.
Well, I noticed, Madeleine, in your online bio, you had listed 5 of the most haunted places that you had known about, I guess is the
Yeah, I
better way.
researched them, yeah.
And you had Waverly Hills as one of them.
Yep.
And you all know that is the old mental hospital in Louisville, so. But was there another that was
Oh, there
equal?
were a lot. I mean, that list was like, I was almost arbitrary because it was like, there's just so many to choose from, honestly. There are some really incredible ones in Northern Europe, actually, that are, the photographs from those places are just, and they're modern photographs. I mean, it's like you look at even looking at the empty picture, it just doesn't feel good inside to look at. But yeah, I mean, that was, you know, like my publisher was like, oh, well, you did all this research where you do this list. And I was like, sure, but you should probably make it like the 30 most, because it's like, it was, you know, curating that list was almost just like throwing darts, because also, you know, like we've been saying, to say the most is kind of ridiculous, because, you know, one person can go in and they don't feel anything, and then the next person goes in and it's, you know, traumatizing. So yeah, it was fun. It was fun to make the list, I guess, but it was also just sort of like, you know, I could put any of these. To me, I don't know, it was like kind of just funny. It was like almost like amusing that they were, you know, pick these places and you can only get 5. It's like, okay. But yeah.
Yes, I think it's interesting that we are in a building that should be haunted, because I think of the history here. It's almost 200 years old.
Were there any duels?
Pardon me?
Were there any duels?
Fought in the building? I don't know.
I guess
know,
that would be a little extreme to do it
Right.
like in the building. That's a pretty heated argument.
Well, duels were fought all around here. There's no question of that. And a governor was the only governor to be assassinated in Kentucky. Goebel was killed right out in the front yard here. So he should be walking around.
Oh, good.
For certain. Then that was in 1900. he did not really serve as governor. He got 3 days' worth, I think, of actually being the governor. So yes, of course we have, and in Frankfort I know of is Liberty Hall, which is a very old residence, and is, again, it has the Gray Lady, and I have seen a photograph of that phenomena coming down a stair, and she was a caretaker. And I think it's interesting that so many of these stories come around people who are caretakers and never left. They want to keep taking care of whomever was in the house. And that just seems to be a legendary part of those kinds of stories, for sure.
Doesn't sound like a healthy relationship.
Let me ask if anyone would like to share your story or ask a question of the panel now.
Don't all rush.
Yes?